quite a few occasions today, but before he does that, Colin will introduce him.
Thank you, President Jerry, fellow Rotarians, guests, and of course our speaker today. I thank you, President Jerry, for allowing me to introduce our speaker today. It's quite a pleasure for me actually, because some of you may not be aware that we are some sort of distant related. Related in the sense that Carol, you must know my wife Carol, her maiden name is also Marsh. And they are both cousins. In fact, Carol, she used to babysit you. You wouldn't know this.
You do now.
That's right, you was a lot littler there. Terry has got quite an interesting story, I believe, to explain here today. I don't want to repeat anything or mess up anything he's going to say there, so I won't say too much about it. Just one thing that I don't think that you're going to talk about. Cool. I'm going to go back about 10 years, and we have spoken about this before at a family function. And 10 years ago, I was visiting Australia on holiday, and I went into a casino there in Sydney. Those who've been in this casino, it's like any other casino. It's got the roulette wheels and blackjack. But knowing the Australians the way they are, the way they like a good gamble, they've got one section set aside about the size of this room, and they've got all these TV screens all around the walls, and all these machines that they put money in, and they bet on different sporting events. And if you had a good memory in sports, you could earn a lot of money, which a lot of people were, by gambling on the outcome of these football matches. And lo and behold, I was there with my friend, and Terry came up on the screen, fighting. And I thought, well, now of course I was going to say you win. I wanted to push the right button to say that you had won. But my friend was arguing with me that he didn't win. And what happened was, unfortunately, we missed the opportunity and it went off the screen. You only get a few seconds to actually do it, and we lost it. And when I come home from Australia, I said to Terry at this function, and I said, I'll see you in Australia in the casino. He said, his actual words were, I bet you won a bundle. And I said, bundle? Why is that? He said, well, he'd never lost the fight. So I would like to introduce the undefeated world champion in the light welterweight boxing, Terry Marsh.
Well, first I'll start off with thank you for the introduction. And looking at the age of a lot of you, an introduction may not be necessary because you may be familiar with me from the past. And I emphasise the past because we're all at that age now when not only do policemen look younger than us, but judges as well. It really hammered home to me on occasions when I come to functions like this. You have middle-aged men coming up to me and saying, I used to love watching you when I was a kid. But the thing about it, what Colin's actually mentioned about Australia, there's a sort of sense and logic about that, because to look at me in a boxing ring, you wouldn't give me a great deal of hope. And most people would have put their money on the other guy. So I'd imagine there was a sort of a logic behind this for these casino guys, thinking that all the money's going to go on the other guy, and then they're going to be proved to be losing because, of course, I won the fights because of my so-called undefeated record. And the thing about it is, from the very start of when I started boxing, age 10 or 11, I was always up against it because I was what you'd describe as a late developer. And invariably, boxing is a sport that requires strength and power. And as a result of that, the guys who were the best at our particular ages were the guys who had the strength and the power. And invariably, that was because they matured that little bit earlier than the rest of us. So I found myself as 11, 12, 13 fighting some of the best guys in the country at that particular age. And it was like fighting my dad. Because you'd have these guys with beards and hairy bodies everywhere and muscles, and there was I, frail, curly haired, anemic looking. I'm still curly haired, but I'm and I look like a cherub really without the cellulite, and how can I say, look very like a girl and with these golden locks, And I sometimes think to myself, it's just as well I never went to private public school. But then, depending on it was unfortunate or fortunate, depending on your sexual orientation. But we won't go down that road. But the thing is, what would happen is these guys would look at me and think, oh, no trouble whatsoever, and they would come charging at me, and I'll poke them off with my jab, which was very, very slight, and you would not know you've been hit by it, which I think served a good purpose, because after 2 rounds, they was being hit numerous times, but it didn't hurt, so they was less sort of, how can I say, rather cavalier about it, and they'd find themselves 2 rounds down in a 3-round fight. And come the third round, I used to run like a girl, dare I say, and I'd win the fight. And this progressed, but it became very difficult and frustrating for me, because I realised that I was really up against it. I was just using skill. I had no power or strength at all. And you know, my dad said, don't worry, just persevere and you'll do it, and things. And I used to watch the Olympics at that particular time. There were some Olympian guys who I'd met who were professional amateur boxers. And it was a big dream for me at the time. I thought I'd go to the Olympics, and I'd love to do that. And that was a sort of ambition. But my dad said, you know, meanwhile, carry on. So I carried on, and he turned around and said, you know, don't worry, your time will come, you'll get stronger. And he actually used a phrase, dare I say, in mixed company. He said, as you get older, your punch gets stronger and your cock will get longer. I actually thought there was sort of, I didn't expect this to be mutually exclusive. I thought one would go with the other. So I used to spend hours working on my punching. Anyway, the punch never came. I could go down that road, but I think you're ahead of me. Yeah. But anyway, I was in 15, 16, but still the sort of biological clock never kicked in, and I was at a big disadvantage. But I find myself winning national titles as a schoolboy, as a junior, as a youth, and before I know it, like I'd had 4 or 5 national titles behind me, and I still wasn't shaving, and I was meeting all these men again, and 17 you become so deemed as a senior and an adult, and you fight anyone of any age. And I just persevered, and I thought I'd get there. And then at one particular stage I had some success, and I thought to myself, there was an advert in the newspapers, and it said, do you think you can hack it? Do you think you got the nerve? Do you want to take the challenge? Join the Marines. And it wasn't actually the Marines that appealed to me, but it was a commando, like the Royal Marine Commandos. And I'm not exactly a raving monarchist, but the commando bit did appeal to me. So I thought, well, I'll try that and give it a go. And so I joined the Marines, and they say, like, you know, you go there a boy and you come back a man. But it did actually give me a little bit of time to mature, and I found myself getting a lot stronger. But that wasn't because of the Marines, it was actually because my body clock had kicked in. And it was around 1978. And in 1978 there was a Commonwealth Games, and I won the National ABA Championships of the year of the Commonwealths. It was in Edmonton. And I thought to myself, I'd love to go to Australia. Yes, I know Edmonton's in Canada, but I had this belief it was in Australia at the time, which made me even more determined to go. And being a national champion, I thought it'd be my turn to go. But they picked someone else, and I thought I was reserved about it. I thought, don't worry, 1980 Olympics, that's my year. So 2 years pass, and I'm now fighting in the ABA Championships again. And it's a bit difficult for me because I've moved up a weight and I'm on the outside looking in. And I drew the worst draw possibly at every particular stage, which is not of my choosing. I would have actually preferred it an easier way, but you know, and I was thinking how unlucky I was. But then I was very lucky in the sense that I won every single one. It was like the equivalent of a football team in the FA Cup meeting Manchester United, Manchester City, Arsenal, Chelsea, et al. In every single round. So I couldn't say I won it by default. I won it on merit. And that was on a Friday evening, and they decided they was going to pick the Olympic team on that weekend. And so Monday comes along, and I'm expecting to go to Moscow, subject to the political problems they had there with the invasion of Afghanistan, which is quite ironic now when we think about it, how things have changed around. And well, they decided that at my particular weight division of welterweight, that there's going to have to be a box-off between myself and another guy called Joey Frost from Liverpool. And Joey was an pretty uncompromising fighter, but he was a guy I'd beat in the championships on merit, I hasten to add. And they said, we'll have a box off. And it was the only division where there was going to be a box off. And they said, and despite the outcome of the box off, we may decide that no one actually represents GB in this particular weight category. So effectively what they were saying was there's going to be a box off, and if I was to win it, then I wouldn't be going, but if Joey Frost was to beat me, then he would be going, and I couldn't interpret it in any other way. So I thought to myself, I'm not going to accommodate that and entertain it, so I declined the box off. And so I never went to the Olympics. And as I said, I was in the Marines at a particular time, and so I found, as Joey Frost was getting on the plane to go to Moscow, I found myself getting on a ferry to go to Ireland, to cross McGlen, a little village on the border in the Marines. And there was quite an irony about that, because I remember Joey, he was having his second or third fight in the championships, and I was just about going out on patrol. We had to go past the television room where some of the guys were doing their sort of rest and relaxation. And as he was about to do his fight, I was off to go on patrol, and I just thought there was an irony about it. But I enjoyed my time, in the Marines and everything else, and didn't have a great deal of regret with 1980 Olympics, because I subsequently had the opportunity of fighting in a multi-nations tournament post the Olympics, which included American fighters which had boycotted the original games. And so and I actually won the gold medal. So I had a few people from the Amateur Boxing Association saying or conceding that they may have made the wrong decision with the selection. But so there was some sort of satisfaction. But it left me very, very disappointed to be an amateur boxer. And that was the end of my boxing career, really. I won another national title just to make the point that the other two were not flukes. And that was it, and I was going to carry on and become, just continue in the Marines. But I realised that I never had any education qualifications at all, and I wasn't going to go very far in the Marines without qualifications. You're limited to like a non-commissioned officer or a sergeant major. So I thought I'd take time out from the Marines and go to get my education. So I got a premature release from the Marines so that I could go to college. But I needed some money in order to actually subsidise the education. It was only taking basic O-levels and then A-levels, but I see it as a 2 or 3 year plan. So I thought to myself, well, how can I get around this? And it coincided, I received a phone call from some guy. Now, if I explain in the services, like there's a sort of, I don't know if it's an irony, but sort of thing, but you get a tall guy and they call him Lofty. You get a tall guy, you might call him even Tiny, come to think of that. You get a big guy you call Tiny, and that's a small guy you call Lofty. And there's a black guy you'd say Chalky, and there was all sorts of nicknames like that. Anyway, this guy who got on the phone to me, his name was Frank. So I guess that should have been a bit of a warning to me, but yeah. And it was actually Frank Warren who was to be my future manager. And he was interested in me turning professional with him because he just started out, and he thought I'd be a good, could do well in the boxing. And I thought, well, it coincided with me being at college, so I could have a couple of years subsidising my education through boxing. And so that's what I did. And I was winning quite a lot of fights, but not having a great deal of success. And well, it sounds a bit perverse, but you have a lot of fights, but you don't have a great deal of success, because boxing is really all about tickets and selling and revenue. And as much as I was like a successful amateur boxer, I didn't have the platform in the professional world that had I won a gold medal, I'd have some sort of standing. So it would be a question of having to sell tickets to justify your particular purse. And not only have you got to sell enough tickets to pay for your particular purse, you have to sell enough tickets to also pay for the purse of your opponent. Because, of course, it takes two to fight. And the promoter not only has to have enough money to pay the wages of the two fighters, he also has to get a bit more to pay for the overheads and everything else. So there's a lot of pressure on managers, or promoters I should say, in order to actually make it a viable business if you haven't got television supporting you and television revenue. And I was probably the worst sort of person you could have, because I would not be able to sell any tickets. I'll give you an example. My very first fight, a coachload of supporters appeared, and I was still that sort of a frail, anemic-looking sort of guy, and could not punch, because in over 200 fights as an amateur and professional, I say about 200, I can't be totally sure, but I'd be a buyer at 199 instead of 201. And the thing is, I've never ever knocked anyone out, and it's not a very good sort of a resume or good statistics to suggest that, you know, I'm going to be going anywhere if I can't punch. It's like having a footballer who can't kick a ball, you know, a boxer who can't punch. It's just, yeah, very, very true. And anyway, so that's the dilemma I was in, and as I said, a coachload of supporters turned up for the first fight. A minibus full was for the second fight, and for the third fight it was just a car full. And I ended up, and Frank more or less gave up on me. I don't mean it in an horrible sort of way, in the sense, but I was just an economic liability. So I'd find myself actually fighting on away shows in places like Bristol and Bradford and Cheltenham, and even in France I actually fought on a fight which I'll come over to later on if I remember, because sometimes I go off at a tangent and I can't think where I was. Anyway, so I remember fighting in Bristol, and my brother brought it to my attention. He said, "You must be the only fighter who has all these supporters in his dressing room." Yeah. And it was very, very true, but I was still winning and having success. And I mean, one particular example is that I went over to France and fought this guy who was the French national champion. His name was Kowalski. And because of the ages, hopefully I can get some sort of resonance here, but I don't know if you all used to watch Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And well, I used to watch it every week. It was compulsive viewing, and you had these sea creatures and monsters and everything else, and you always had this guy who was always in it every week, a regular, called Kowalski. And he always seemed to actually be the guy who was injured and got damaged and never died, but always injured and knocked about. And this guy Kowalski, who I was fighting, it took me back to the Kowalski in the Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, because he had scar tissue all over his face, and you know, you could see he was a boxer. You know, there's no doubt about it. And I was fighting him in this French mining village, Saint-Amand, which is somewhere near the Rouen, I believe, or the Rhine. And the thing about it is, why does a French promoter want to bring me over to France with the plane ticket costs and hotel costs and everything else, so that I can actually beat up the hometown fighter? You know, I'm there as an opponent, really, but fundamentally, I'm not, you know, but I never actually read the script though, and I won the fight, and the scar tissue that he had all opened up, he was badly cut and everything else, and there's always a danger of hometown decisions, but it was never going to happen. It wasn't even on the radar. And I'd actually been escorted into the ring by two very attractive French round card girls, and they similarly escorted me out. And then I was presented with a token prize. Well, I won't worry about the token prize, it was the money which was more important for a professional boxer, which was about £500 if I remember at the time. We're going back a few years, so it's a little bit worth a little bit more than it is now. And my wife went along as well. And the thing is, she got quite upset because she was, arguably, I think the phrase is tired and emotional. I have to say that because I understand this is actually being filmed, so I don't want any libel risks or anything like that coming on my door. And the thing about it, she got upset and being tired and emotional, and took sort of umbrage to the fact that these two young ladies were actually escorting me. And she then decided to let me have a left hand, or left fist, or right fist. I can't actually remember which it was at the time. And they always say it's the punches you don't see are the ones that hurt. Yeah. And it was just ironic that I'd actually gone 8 rounds with the French national champion, and he never laid a glove on me. And I come home with a black eye that night. Anyway, my success then found myself fighting for a British title. But by that time, I've dropped the subject about the education and the Marines, and arguably because of my wife's disposition, like it was going to be very hard for me to go back into the Marines as a potential officer, because although it's not a criteria, I'd imagine this sort of the disposition of your wife is a consideration. So I give that up as a lost cause. But I got some exams and ended up joining the fire brigade, so I found myself being a fireman and a boxer. And never the two shall meet, so to speak. And I found myself fighting for a British championship. And again, like every other fight really, I always thought I was going to go into a fight and lose it. And I just went with the attitude every time I was fighting, well, if I'm going to lose this fight, I'll go down all guns blazing and give it my best effort. And it's not sort of the right sort of message you get from other people. They also talk about positive mental attitude and things like that, but it's something I've never been able to associate myself with. I've always gone in with this sort of respect for my opponent as opposed to disrespect, saying I'm going to kill him and everything else. And the only way I can really relate to it is that there's two instincts you have when you get into a boxing ring or any arena, and one's a killer instinct and one's an instinct of self-preservation and survival. The warrior versus the coward. Well, I was always the coward, there was no doubt about it, and so it was always the self-preservation what I got into a ring for, not to kill the other guy, but just to make sure that he doesn't kill me. I don't mean literally, of course. And that was always the case, and I used to train very meticulously, very hard, and very sort of focused with my training. But that was always because I was actually thinking I was going to lose my fight, and I needed to actually just go down and do the best I can and come out with all guns blazing and go out on my shield if the case may be. Anyway, I actually won that fight. I was now a British champion, and the guy I beat was a guy called Clinton Mackenzie, who was a good, uncompromising fighter. And it was a classic fight, and now I found myself with the title of the Fighting Fireman. Prior to this I was the Marine Machine, but now I'm the Fighting Fireman. Yeah. And Clinton at the time was the number 4 in the world ratings at number 4. And through the so-called conquer syndrome, I found myself taking his place. And now I was number 4, and so the next fight was going to be for a title. So I was actually in the top 10. I was a contender. And I always think of the Marlon Brando film On the Waterfront, and he says, I could have been a contender, Charlie, or something, or the famous lines or something. And I was actually a contender, and I thought, oh, you know, I've made it. You know, I'm a contender. So I could not use that line anymore. I could have been a contender, Charlie, which is probably the best I ever wrote for as a professional boxer. And every fight after that was actually going to be a world title fight, and you've got various world championships belts. You've got WBA, WBC, IBF, and it's been fractured to a greater degree now. There was 3 at the time, which was a WBA, WBC, and IBF. So it's very hard to actually get the title for all 3 belts at the time. But the WBA champion at the time was a guy called Patricio Oliva. He was Italian, and this had a certain appeal to me because Patricio Oliva was an Olympic gold medalist, and he'd won the Olympics in the 1980 Moscow Games. But not only was he Olympic gold medalist, he also got the award as the best boxer of the Olympics on that particular Moscow Olympics. So it just appealed to me. I thought to myself, this would be great if I could beat the guy who got the gold medal in the Olympics. And not only did I beat the guy who got the gold medal, but I beat the guy who was the best of the best, so to speak. And I was really up for that, but the contracts were signed, and all of a sudden I had a warm-up fight, and then news broke through that it wasn't going to happen. Olivia was now fighting someone else, which really sent a couple of messages to me, and which was, you know, a big disappointment, because that would have been a great way to finish off my career, beating the guy who won the gold medal in the Olympics, assuming I was capable of. Interestingly enough, there's a sort of irony and a sort of contradiction there, because in all the fights I used to have, I used to think I was getting into the ring and I was going to lose. This is one particular fight that I always thought that I was going to win. But notwithstanding that contradiction, it was something I was really hoping for, but it never happened. And I realised in boxing, in many ways, that contracts are not worth the paper that they're written on. But I did find myself then fighting for the IBF championship against a champion who was an American called Joe Manley. And the fight was actually in my hometown of Basildon. And Basildon hasn't really got a venue to accommodate that, even for me, who is not a great ticket seller. But the turnout for the crowd was in a circus tent. And you know, it was a very parochial sort of thing in many, many ways. And it was a great night for Basildon, dare I say. Like, everyone who was there has a fond memory of it, even when they talk about it years later. And I get stopped in, you know, saying what a great time it was and a great memory that all the people had there. And then I found myself the world champion. And it was quite funny, really, because the fight that I had, it was all going my way all the time. And it was in the 10th round, I think it was, and I threw a series of shots. I left hook, right hook, and left hook, and they've hit the guy, and he's falling to the ground. And where the punches come from, I just don't know. No, I can't punch. And I've hit him twice on the way down. And when I say hit him twice on the way down, I don't say when he was on one knee. It was legitimate sort of blows. And I've seen it on the telly subsequently and in slow motion, and his head just goes from the left to right, like that. And it was vicious. And I look at it and I think that I wasn't proud of what I was doing at that particular time. Looking back, it wasn't a problem at the time, Mason. And he went on the floor. Now, I've seen other boxers, you know, the greats, who hit their guys. The guy goes on the floor and they just know that they've got the beating of him. And they are so nonchalant about it, as if they hit him, they knew he was going down, and they just amble to the neutral corner. Or they just put their hands up in the air to acknowledge the punch and their sort of impending victory. And they've all got a sort of swagger about them. And it's a bit like footballers, when they get goals, they do a special sort of goal celebration. And there was that sort of thing in boxing, not to the same extent, but nonetheless there was. And I found myself now at the stage where I put this guy down with 3 wicked, you know, but at the same time, dare I say, good shots. And what do? And I just sprinted to the neutral corner, because I know the referee doesn't take up the count until you go to the neutral corner. And, you know, it was so uncool. And there's lots of other things I do in life which I want to change the clock and put back, but that was one of them. You know, it could have been a great moment for me, but I sprinted to the neutral corner, and to the guy's credit, he even got up before 10. So I'd even hit him 3 times where normally 1 punch would survive, and it's either he had an iron jaw or I had velvet gloves, and I think it was the latter. I can't crack eggs. And I had one more fight, and it was always my intention that I'd hopefully win the fight. I suspected that I wasn't going to win it, but I was going to give it my 100%, not a percentage more, just 100%. And then I'll have one defence and hopefully retire undefeated. But the title of this was talking to a world champion, and really, you know, I thought about it. Well, the world champions are, you know, quite common. And I was starting going back over the years and who the world champions are. And there's quite a few of us. But then subsequently I thought to myself, well, yeah, well, I should say British world champions we're talking about now. I said, well, there's quite a few of us, but there's more gold medalists than what there are world champion boxers. So we're a rarer breed, dare I say, especially after the last performance, of course, in Stratford. But the thing is, I was undefeated world champion, and that has a price. And you don't get many undefeated world champions, be it British, American, or anything else. And the reason why that is, I suspect, is because there is a price. And the price you actually pay is because your next fight is always your biggest payday. And once you become a world champion, really, your pay days increases exponentially. And it's very, very, very difficult in order to actually walk away from that next payday, which is your severance. So most fighters can't afford or won't walk away from the next payday, and they always retire 1 fight too late as opposed to 1 fight too early, arguably. So suspect that I may have retired 1 fight too early as opposed to 1 fight too late. And it cost me financially, as my son, who wasn't alive at the time, keeps reminding me. But nonetheless, the Undefeated is something I'm particularly proud of, and hopefully I will continue to be undefeated. But that brings us on to a book, dare I say, which is called Undefeated. And, well, just bring you aware of the book. This one's for the raffle, because we can draw the raffle again, and so one of you can have it, which was the purpose for me to come here, just to make you aware of the book. And then, subsequently, I'd finished boxing. And like most boxers, really, where do you go from there? It's very, very difficult to move on. I was fortunate that I had the fire brigade still working there and helped me keep your feet on the ground. But I had a diagnosis for epilepsy, which lost me my fireman's job, which made a little bit things difficult. So you have like the sort of the 13th round in boxing is always the very hardest round. But rather than go on to where it went from there and afterwards, I'm quite happy to ask questions about it. It's been well documented if anyone needs to ask. But so I'll finish there otherwise, unless there's anything anyone else would like to ask or what the case may be. And pass you back over to Colin, who can take over with the questions and answers.
We'll have some questions. I'm absolutely sure. Dennis,
Terry, I've always been a great advocate of boxing. Always been a great advocate of kids being taught boxing at school. Not all schools do that. I noticed one or two schools are now going back to teaching boxing in their curriculum. But when I started boxing at the age of 12, it was at a youth club, 5-year-old youth club at Dagenham. I don't know if anybody knows it. And I was there, did that for 4 years. And the old man always, when I used to go home, black eye or the old man said, "Serves you bleeding right, you should adapt," and all this. So you've got a lot of sympathy from the family. But are you an advocate of these youth clubs or schools teaching boxing? Because there used to be some very good boxing clubs in the old days.
What's interesting, I had the same problem. I went to Westminster City School, and I went to box, and they didn't approve it and wouldn't let me box. And when I was boxing, I was indifferent about it. When I retired from boxing, I was anti-boxing completely. And then my son took up boxing at the age of 17, under his own volition, against my advice. And he had a few fights. I went along to watch him. Got involved only marginally, not as a coach, but more as a mentor, saying you should do this, that, and the other. And I see some of the young lads in there and the discipline and the sacrifices that they make. And where I was sort of away from boxing 100% and wanted nothing to do with it, seeing it as bad, that I've actually come around to I've recanted again. So I've gone from one place to the other, back again. So I actually do think it would be a good thing for kids to do. Because it ain't about keeping them off the streets in many ways. Well, a lot of people say, oh yeah, it keeps them out of trouble with the police and everything else. It's not so much about that. It's about discipline, self-discipline, respect, which is self-respect. And you do get bullying, and it affects a lot of kids. And I just think by having that confidence, it gives them a sort of confidence which they otherwise won't get. And for some people it might be swimming, for some people it might be football and everything else. But I think with a lot of kids, boxing would be a good thing to focus on for so many different ways, and fitness and everything else. So I think it should be not. So I've got the dilemma because I actually believe schools are there for education, and I believe like parents should, and everything else outside of sort of academic education should be up to the parents to actually encourage their kids and everything else. But I would recommend any parent to send their kids, boy or girl, come think of it as it is now, down the boxing club, just for the experience.
Jim, George.
Sorry, it's a twofold question. You seem to have successfully switched from various careers, and I mean that in all honesty, in compliment. You've gone from boxing to marine to fireman. You've come to another problem in your life, a stage in your life. I gather you said you've been diagnosed with epilepsy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Where do you see your future? Could you be involved in for example, the coaching, the impetus that we've got from the current Olympics?
Well, with the epilepsy, arguably I made the mistake of going to see a neurologist as opposed to a nutritionist, and I think I would have got a different diagnosis. But you know, it's one of them things. But you just have to get on with your life. I mean, I've never
When you
got
say
any-
diagnosis, do you mean diagnosis or treatment? Because epilepsy
No,
is a
diagnosis,
clear cut.
well, see, they had brain scans and everything else,
Yeah.
and it's only I passed out on a couple of occasions, and other times I felt a little bit sort of lightheaded.
Yeah.
And on the strength of that, the neurologist actually made a diagnosis of epilepsy. I'd ordered various tests and everything else, but nothing come along on the tests. But nonetheless, the diagnosis was still confirmed. So it caused all sorts of problems because I lost my job as a fireman, whereas I was quite smug because I was able to retire as a boxer, knowing I had the fallback of a job as a fireman. Because you know.
That's why I asked what you saw of your future.
Oh well, subsequently after that, I mean, like most ex-boxers or ex-sportsmen, you go through this sort of period of, I say, post-traumatic stress, not stress disorder, but post-traumatic celebrity disorder, or something like that. And because you lose a role, you lose a purpose, and the other thing about it, it's very difficult to actually normalise yourself to get a job. Because you know you're treated as well, not quite royalty, but you're these celebrities. For when I was a world champion at the time, you know, it looked like the world revolved around me. Because wherever I went, there was a car to pick me up, or there was someone to take a photo. Whatever I said was either on the radio or on the television and things like that. And all of a sudden, you think to yourself, the world, you know, there isn't a world outside of that. And then when you're away from it, of course. Then the penny drops and you think to yourself, well, hold up, you know, what's going on here? And you feel a little bit deceived and bitter and twisted. I don't think you should be bitter and twisted, but you are deceived in a roundabout sort of way, because you think, well, no one's telling me about this. You know, I thought what I was getting now. It's a bit like the emperor wearing no clothes in many, many ways. You have to go onto a reality check. And that's where I think a lot of sportsmen and ex-celebrities, because they all end up becoming ex-celebrities, have a problem, and to actually deal with that is very, very, very difficult.
Could you be involved in the training? The euphoria that we have of sport at this point in time is sucking in, if that's the right expression, people with expertise and knowledge for the next generation.
For me, the thing is like, I feel like I've got a lot of input to make, but as a coach, but not as a trainer, because if I can actually make the point, a trainer is someone who takes you out running every morning, tells you to do hundreds of press-ups and everything. A coach is more technical, but from a boxing point of view, there isn't it doesn't appear to be a differentiation between coaching and training, and where the distinct difference is. And I ain't got any time to waste on people training. But yeah, to do it, you have to go through sort of various things. It's only silly little things, but it becomes very bureaucratic. You have to take a coaching course, CRB checks and everything else, and the bureaucracy, it just doesn't make it worth it. And the other thing about it, I've got sort of parental and fraternal commitments and duties and things. So it just and also working as well. So it does make it difficult. But I've always got advice to give to people, of course, but I ain't actually involved in any way, shape or form. I don't see, there's not a facility there, really, because you can find yourself treading on other people's toes and they're building their empires.
One more question, George?
Just a quick one. I mean, you still look remarkably fit. Do you still work out? And
yeah, I train as often as I can. So, you know, I run 2-3 times a week and always get the stairs in work, which is on the 8th floor. So.
One more,
Terry,
Dennis.
only coming back, I want to make an observation of something you said earlier on about training the kids and teaching the kids with character and various other things. I've got a program here, which in a little way we can, from an association which I got drummed out of, that's the Air Training Corps.
Right.
And the program in 1949, and at 7 stone, at 8 stone boxing was Cadet Reginald Craig, and at 8 stone 7, his brother, Ronnie Craig. So they built up a lot of character.
As I said, some people would be football and others, so you know, I'm very conscious of that. I don't think it's a saver for everyone, but it's more.
We did them well.
You see who his heroes are.
Thank you. Ken, you're giving the vote of thanks today.
Well, I am, yes, Mr. President. Terry, what an appropriate talk to have post-Olympics, which we've just had. It fitted in so well. And what a colourful and flamboyant life you've led. And reminded me of my only boxing match in which I was actually disqualified for hitting the fellow when he was down. His name was Michael Smith. I remember it well, but he was short. Okay. But delivered with such elegance and humour. Thank you very much indeed. It really was.
One more raffle, and Terry can safely draw this if he doesn't pick his own ticket. And it is number 79.
Oh, I was 8. Very simple.
Well, fellas, what can I say after that? Just some reminders for next week. It's a reminder of the apologies book.